There are cars people line up to buy the moment they arrive. And then there are cars like the Pontiac Trans Am WS6, machines that spend years sitting in dealership showrooms, only to become legends after they're gone. It's a strange pattern that repeats throughout automotive history. People often don't realize what they have until someone stops building it. The WS6 is one of the greatest examples of that phenomenon. Today, clean examples sell for prices that would have seemed ridiculous 20 years ago. Enthusiasts proudly preserve them as symbols of the final years of Pontiac performance, and many now consider the WS6 one of the greatest American sports cars of its generation. But when it was new, the story looked very different. By the late 1990s, the American performance market was changing rapidly. Insurance costs remained high, buyers were shifting toward SUVs, and manufacturers were investing more money in luxury features than raw driving excitement. Pontiac itself was beginning to lose the bold identity that had made it famous during the muscle car era. Yet hidden inside General Motors was a small group of engineers who still believed there was room for one last unapologetic performance machine. Instead of designing an entirely new sports car, they chose to perfect the fourth-generation Firebird. The result was the WS6 Performance and Handling Package, introduced as the most focused version of the Trans Am. It wasn't simply an appearance package. Every major improvement served a purpose. Functional ram air induction forced cooler air toward the engine, revised suspension components sharpened handling, stronger anti-roll bars improved stability, larger wheels carried wider performance tires, and the aggressive front fascia with its unmistakable twin nostrils immediately separated the WS6 from every other Firebird on the road. Under the hood lived one of General Motors' greatest engines, the legendary all-aluminum LS1 5.7-liter V8. Officially rated at 320 horsepower in later models, many enthusiasts believed actual output was even higher. More importantly, the LS1 delivered effortless torque, incredible reliability, and enormous tuning potential. Whether paired with the 6-speed Tremec manual transmission or the 4-speed automatic, the WS6 offered performance that rivaled cars costing significantly more. 0 to 60 arrived in just over 5 seconds, quarter-mile times comfortably reached the 13-second range, and on the highway the car felt almost unstoppable. But perhaps the most fascinating thing about the WS6 wasn't how fast it was. It was how unapologetically American it remained during an era when many sports cars were becoming increasingly refined. The seating position was low, visibility wasn't perfect, the doors were enormous, and the long hood stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Everything about the driving experience reminded you that this wasn't trying to imitate Europe or Japan. It embraced its own identity. Personally, I think that's exactly why the WS6 feels so special today. Modern performance cars often chase perfection through technology, while the Trans Am chased emotion through simplicity. It wasn't built to impress journalists with complicated engineering. It was built to make every drive memorable. And perhaps that's why, years after Pontiac disappeared forever, people finally began realizing that the WS6 wasn't simply one of the last great Firebirds, it was one of the last moments when American performance still prioritized character above everything else. The Pontiac Trans Am WS6 didn't become an icon because it sold in massive numbers or dominated racing championships. It became an icon because it represented a philosophy that was quietly disappearing from the automotive world. At a time when manufacturers were introducing more electronics, softer suspensions, and increasingly isolated driving experiences, the WS6 remained wonderfully mechanical. Every press of the throttle produced an immediate response from the naturally aspirated LS1 V8, every gear change through the Tremec 6-speed manual reminded you that you, not a computer, were responsible for extracting the car's performance, and every corner demanded genuine driver involvement. Looking back today, it's easy to understand why so many enthusiasts fell in love with it after production had already ended. It wasn't the fastest car of its era, but it delivered something that many modern performance cars struggle to recreate: personality. Of course, the WS6 didn't exist without competition. Chevrolet's Camaro Z28 shared the same F-body platform and the same LS1 engine, making the rivalry almost a family feud inside General Motors. On paper, the two cars were remarkably similar, but their personalities couldn't have been more different. The Camaro looked cleaner and more restrained, while the Trans Am embraced dramatic styling with pop-up headlights, muscular curves, functional ram air scoops, and an aggressive stance that announced its intentions long before the engine even started. Personally, I've always felt the WS6 had more presence. It wasn't necessarily the objectively better car, but it was the one that made you turn around for one last look after parking it. Outside General Motors, the Ford Mustang GT remained its biggest rival. The Mustang offered solid V8 performance, a simpler live rear axle, and an enormous aftermarket community, but many enthusiasts acknowledged that the LS1 powered WS6 delivered stronger acceleration and better high-speed performance. Then there was the SVT Cobra, especially the supercharged 2003 to 2004 Terminator that arrived shortly after the WS6 production ended. Even today, debates between LS1 and Terminator fans continue across forums, drag strips, and car meets around the world. Yet what truly separated the WS6 wasn't just its performance, it was the engine itself. The LS1 would go on to become one of General Motors' most celebrated V8s, respected not only for its power but also for its incredible durability and limitless tuning potential. Simple bolt-on modifications, an upgraded camshaft, improved cylinder heads, and ECU tuning could unlock dramatic gains without sacrificing reliability. Before long, the LS community had transformed the WS6 into one of America's favorite platforms for modification. Naturally aspirated builds producing over 450 horsepower became common, while turbocharged and supercharged examples routinely exceeded 700, 800, or even 1,000 horsepower. That's one of the reasons the WS6 never disappeared from American car culture. It continued evolving long after Pontiac had stopped building it. Of course, like every performance car, ownership wasn't completely trouble-free. The large plastic dashboard and interior panels often developed squeaks as the cars aged, T-top seals required regular attention to prevent water leaks, window motors occasionally failed, and the low front bumper demanded caution over driveways and speed bumps. Some owners also criticized the driving position and limited outward visibility. But strangely, those imperfections became part of the experience rather than reasons to avoid the car. The mechanical simplicity of the LS1 meant maintenance remained relatively straightforward, replacement parts were widely available, and countless owners learned to work on their own cars in home garages. Perhaps that's why the WS6 built such a loyal following. It wasn't just transportation, it became a hobby, a weekend project, and in many cases a lifelong passion. Then came 2002. General Motors announced that production of both the Chevrolet Camaro and Pontiac Firebird would come to an end. The Saint-Therese assembly plant in Quebec closed its doors, marking the end of the legendary F-body platform after decades of American performance history. At the time, many people believed another generation would eventually replace it. Few realized they were witnessing the final chapter of the Firebird name forever. Pontiac itself would disappear only a few years later, and with it went one of America's boldest performance brands. That's when something remarkable happened. The very cars people had once overlooked suddenly became objects of nostalgia. Clean, low-mileage WS6 models started disappearing into private collections, prices began climbing year after year, and an entirely new generation discovered what enthusiasts had been quietly saying all along. Sometimes the cars that leave the biggest impact aren't the ones everyone celebrates immediately, they're the ones whose true value only becomes obvious after they're gone forever. History has a funny way of correcting people's mistakes. Cars that were once ignored often become the ones everyone wishes they had bought when they were affordable. The Pontiac Trans Am WS6 is one of those rare machines. It didn't need to win every comparison test or become the best-selling sports car in America to leave a lasting legacy. Instead, it earned something far more valuable: respect. Respect from enthusiasts who understood that beneath its aggressive styling lived one of the greatest naturally aspirated V8 platforms General Motors had ever produced. Respect from collectors who watched clean examples become harder to find every single year. And respect from an entirely new generation of drivers who discovered that performance isn't measured only by horsepower figures or lap times, but by the emotions a car creates every time you turn the key. Personally, I think that's why the WS6 continues to grow in popularity more than 2 decades after production ended. It represents the final years of an era when American performance cars were still unapologetically loud, mechanical, and full of character. There were no digital dashboards trying to entertain you, no artificial engine sounds played through speakers, and no endless driving modes changing the personality of the car with the push of a button. What you got was a naturally aspirated LS1 V8, rear-wheel drive, a manual transmission if you wanted one, and a driving experience that felt honest from the first mile to the last. When Pontiac disappeared in 2010, the automotive world lost much more than a brand. It lost a company that was never afraid to build bold, exciting, and sometimes unconventional performance cars. The WS6 became one of the final reminders of that spirit, standing today as one of the greatest Firebirds ever built and one of the defining American sports cars of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Great cars don't become legends overnight. Sometimes they need years for people to truly understand what they meant. And perhaps that's the greatest achievement of the Pontiac Trans Am WS6. It didn't change because the world started loving it, the world simply caught up to what the car had always been. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more stories about the world's most legendary automobiles. Every subscription helps the channel continue bringing these incredible automotive stories back to life. And now I have one question for you. If you could choose one American performance icon from the late 1990s, would you take the Pontiac Trans Am WS6, the Chevrolet Camaro SS, the Ford Mustang SVT Cobra, or the Dodge Viper GTS? Let me know your choice and the reason why in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next documentary.